For decades, Rush fans have argued about one question. What is the one album that perfectly captured the band at its peak? Many would answer without hesitations. Moving Pictures. Released in 1981, the album was not just another record in Rush's catalog. It was the moment when Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, and Neil Peart transformed from a successful progressive rock band into a global phenomenon. It produced some of the group's most recognizable songs, including Tom Sawyer, Red Barchetta, YYZ, and Limelight. But now, something unexpected is happening. On the 50-something tour, when Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson bring songs from Moving Pictures back to the stage, they are not simply performing old classics. They are reopening a chapter of Rush's history that many fans believed could never happen again. And the reason this changes everything is bigger than nostalgia, because this is not the same Rush that recorded those songs in the early 1980s. The stage is different, the circumstances are different, and the emotions behind the music are completely different. When Rush originally performed Moving Pictures, they were a band at the height of their creative power. They were constantly pushing boundaries, experimenting with complex arrangements, and proving that progressive rock could reach a massive audience. The album became Rush's commercial breakthrough, reaching millions of listeners and introducing the band to fans who had never explored their earlier work. But after the tragic passing of drummer Neil Peart in 2020, many fans wondered if they would ever hear the spirit of Rush performed live again. For years, the answer seemed impossible. Neil Peart was not only the drummer. He was the lyricist, the storyteller, and one of the defining voices behind Rush's identity. That is why the 50-something tour carries a different weight. With Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson returning to the stage, every familiar guitar riff and every bass line carries memories of a band that changed the lives of millions. And when they choose to revisit Moving Pictures, they are choosing the album that represents the exact moment when Rush became something much larger than a cult favorite. But there is one detail about this tour that makes these performances even more fascinating. The songs from Moving Pictures were never simple songs to perform. They were built around unusual time signatures, complicated musicianship, and arrangements that challenged even the most talented musicians. So the question becomes, why return to this particular album decades later? Why risk revisiting material that set such a high standard? And what does playing Moving Pictures again reveal about where Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson are emotionally, musically, and personally today? To understand why these performances matter so much, we have to go back to the moment when Moving Pictures changed Rush forever. When Rush entered the studio to create Moving Pictures, nobody could have predicted just how important that album would become. At the time, the band was already respected among rock musicians. Albums like 2012 and Permanent Waves had built a loyal following. But Rush was still fighting for recognition in a music industry that often preferred shorter, simpler songs. Then came 1981. Instead of slowing down or changing their identity to chase popularity, Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, and Neil Peart did something completely different. They created an album that kept the intelligence and complexity of progressive rock while making the music more accessible to a wider audience. That balance was what made Moving Pictures special. The opening track, Tom Sawyer, became one of the most recognizable songs in rock history. Its powerful opening, Geddy Lee's unique voice, Alex Lifeson's unforgettable guitar work, and Neil Peart's precise drumming created a sound that immediately separated Rush from almost every other band of the era. But the album's impact went far beyond one song. Limelight explored the uncomfortable relationship between fame and privacy. Red Barchetta told a futuristic story through vivid imagery. YYZ showed the band's technical ability without needing a single lyric. Every track had a purpose. Every instrument had a voice. And that is exactly why bringing these songs back decades later is such a major event. Many classic rock bands revisit their greatest hits because fans want to hear familiar songs. But with Rush, the challenge has always been different. Their music was never just about remembering a melody. It was about recreating a complicated musical experience. A Rush performance required incredible precision. The musicians had to remember unusual rhythms, sudden changes, and arrangements that left almost no room for mistakes. For Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson, returning to Moving Pictures means returning to a period when the band was operating at its highest level. But there is another emotional layer. For years, Rush's live identity was built around three people standing on stage together. Geddy's bass and vocals, Alex's guitar, and Neil's legendary drums created a chemistry that fans believed could never be duplicated. After Neil Peart's retirement from touring in 2015 and his death in 2020, that chapter officially ended. So when Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson decide to perform Rush material again, they are not pretending nothing changed. They understand that fans are not only listening to the music, they are remembering moments, memories, and a connection that lasted for generations. The 50-something tour is not about replacing the past. It is about honoring it, and choosing moving pictures as a centerpiece sends a powerful message. This is the album that represents Rush's transformation from a respected band into a cultural force. But there is still a bigger question. Can these songs still create the same magic without the original three-piece lineup? And why do fans believe that hearing Moving Pictures again in 2026 feels completely different from hearing it decades ago? The answer reveals what made Rush unlike any other band in rock history. The biggest challenge of bringing Moving Pictures back to the stage is not simply remembering the songs, it is capturing the feeling, because Rush was never just about playing notes correctly. The band's power came from the connection between three musicians who spent decades understanding each other's timing, instincts, and creative decisions. Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson were not just bandmates, they were musical partners who built a unique language together with Neil Peart. That is why the 50-something tour represents such a different moment in Rush's story. When fans hear songs from Moving Pictures today, they are hearing more than the soundtrack of the early 1980s. They are hearing the legacy of a band that influenced generations of musicians and listeners around the world. And this is where the decision to revisit the album becomes so meaningful. A song like Tom Sawyer is not difficult because people do not know it. It is difficult because almost everyone knows it. Fans remember every detail. They remember the opening sounds. They remember the energy of the original performances. They remember Neil Peart's legendary drum parts that became a standard for rock musicians everywhere. That level of expectation creates enormous pressure. But instead of trying to recreate the past exactly, Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson approach these performances from a different perspective. They are not attempting to turn back time. They are showing what these songs mean after more than 4 decades of history. That difference changes the entire experience. In the early years, Moving Pictures represented ambition. It represented a young band, proving that complicated music could reach a massive audience. Today, those same songs represent survival, friendship, and the lasting impact of a creative journey that began more than 50 years ago. The album also carries a special importance because it captures Rush at a rare balance point. They were still adventurous enough to experiment, but they had reached a level where millions of people could connect with their music. Many bands spend their careers searching for that moment. Rush found it with Moving Pictures, and that is why returning to this album is not just a safe choice. It is actually one of the most meaningful choices they could make. But there is another reason these performances feel different. The absence of Neil Peart changes the way fans hear every song. For decades, his drums were one of the defining sounds of Rush. His playing was powerful, technical, and instantly recognizable. Now every performance carries a reminder of the musician who helped create these legendary moments. Instead of ignoring that history, Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson appear to embrace it. The music becomes a celebration of what Rush achieved rather than a replacement for what was lost. And as the 50-something tour continues, one thing becomes clear. Playing Moving Pictures again is not simply about performing old songs. It is about proving that great music can continue to evolve even after the circumstances around it have changed. But the most surprising part of this story is how fans are reacting, because many believe these performances reveal something about Rush that was hidden all along. For many Rush fans, the 50-something tour is not just a concert experience. It feels like a reunion with a part of their own lives. That is the unique power of Moving Pictures. The album has followed fans through different generations, different stages of life, and different moments they will never forget. Someone who discovered Rush in 1981 may hear Limelight and remember the first time they saw the band live. A younger fan may hear the same song and remember discovering Rush through their parents' record collection or through streaming decades later. The music connects different generations because the themes never became outdated. Limelight, for example, remains relevant because it explores the complicated relationship between success and personal privacy. The song was inspired by Neil Peart's discomfort with fame, but the message continues to connect with anyone who has struggled with public attention or expectations. That is another reason why performing Moving Pictures today feels different. The songs have aged, but their meaning has not. And for Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson, revisiting this material is also a reminder of the incredible journey they shared. When Rush released Moving Pictures, they were not yet considered one of the biggest names in rock history. They were still proving themselves, but the album changed that forever. It reached the top of charts in multiple countries, became Rush's highest-selling album in the United States, and helped introduce the band to millions of new listeners. The success opened doors that changed the direction of their career. Suddenly, Rush was no longer only admired by musicians and devoted rock fans. They became a major force in popular music. That transformation is exactly what makes the album so important during the 50-something tour. It represents the moment everything changed. Before Moving Pictures, Rush was a band searching for a wider audience. After Moving Pictures, they were legends. However, the decision to perform these songs again is not without challenges. A performance today exists in the shadow of the original recordings. Fans know every sound, every transition, and every legendary moment. There is always the question of whether a new version can live up to memories created decades ago. But perhaps that is the wrong way to look at it, because the goal is not to recreate 1981. The goal is to celebrate what those songs have become. Over the years, Moving Pictures has grown from an album into a symbol of creativity, dedication, and musical freedom. And that is why seeing Geddy Lee and Lifeson return to this material carries so much emotional weight. They are not just playing songs from their past. They are showing that the connection between an artist and their audience can survive time, change, and loss. But behind the emotional impact is another fascinating question. What happens when musicians in their 70s return to some of the most technically demanding music they ever created? Because Moving Pictures was not easy, even when Rush was at its peak. And the answer reveals why these performances are being viewed as something much bigger than a simple tribute. The physical and musical demands of performing Moving Pictures are one of the biggest reasons this tour has captured so much attention. Many rock bands can return decades later and perform their biggest songs, but Rush was always different. Their music demanded an extraordinary level of precision. These were not simple three-chord rock songs designed only around a catchy chorus. Rush songs often contained complex arrangements, unusual rhythms, and instrumental sections that required years of practice to master. For Geddy Lee, returning to these songs means revisiting some of the most challenging bass lines and vocal performances of his entire career. His bass playing became one of the defining elements of Rush's sound. Instead of simply supporting the guitar and drums, Lee's bass often carried melodies, created movement, and filled the space like another lead instrument. Lifeson faced a similar challenge. His guitar style on Moving Pictures was not about constantly dominating the spotlight. Instead, he created layers of sound, textures, and memorable riffs that gave Rush its unique atmosphere. Together, Lee and Lifeson created a musical partnership that helped define one of rock's most respected bands. But time changes everything. The musicians returning to these songs today are not the same musicians who recorded them in 1981. They have decades of experience, different perspectives, and a deeper understanding of what these songs represent. That is what makes the 50-something tour so interesting. It is not about proving that they are still the same band from their younger years. It is about showing that great musicianship can transform with age. The songs may be familiar, but the meaning behind them has changed. When fans hear YYZ or Tom Sawyer today, they are not only hearing technical brilliance, they are hearing history. They are hearing the sound of a band that spent more than 40 years building a relationship with its audience. And perhaps the most emotional part is that these performances keep the spirit of Rush alive without ignoring the reality of what happened. Neil Peart's absence will always be felt,